My first question was, what is the vision of the U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East?
What is the vision of the U.S. foreign policy?
Besides taking the oil from underneath the Middle East.
I think I understand your question, and I guess the problem with that question is that there are a whole lot of actors in that play that we have not listened to or talked to, and nobody's laid it all out. And what we're presented with is one narrow item at a time, and that's where we often wind up with this kind of question being put before the Congress. The broader issue of what we want in terms of peace, or what we want in terms of stability, or what we want in terms of democracy, is much more muddled. I mean, if you look at what's going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, you have to ask yourself, what was the purpose of that? And I don't think that's clear, and we could have a whole evening's discussion about that issue. We're talking tonight about whether or not we go into Syria with bombs and whatever. Yes?
Hi, Jim. I'm hearing a lot of political calculation in response to a humanitarian issue. And so that's disappointing that there's this calculation or that calculation. Meanwhile, these people are dying, women and children and everybody. And this is a democracy, but we aren't all sitting in those intelligence briefings, and maybe you are, or our representatives are, and so you're kind of the experts in that regard. So you may be called on to make an unpopular decision because you have information that we don't have. But finally, I'll just say that I'm leaning towards pretty strongly favoring a strike, but I'm not 100%. But I'm really disappointed also in the certainty that so many people have. They're absolutely opposed to a strike, or they're absolutely for it. This is a very complicated situation. So I think we all would do better to just, I don't know, think more about it, not be so certain. Thank you.
Wait. Everyone is entitled to express their opinion, and I don't want anybody to be shut down.
Hello, Jim. Thank you for having us, and thanks to church for having us as well. As a Syrian American, the way I look at it, Syria is sick and Bashar Assad is cancer. He needs to be stopped at all costs. For those who are questioning the use of chemical weapons by Assad regime, someone who killed 125,000, who've used Scud missiles, these are ballistic missiles against its own people, someone who's using napalm, phosphorus shells, and jet fighters against innocent civilians, someone who killed innocent civilians for 8 months, you think he's incapable of delivering such chemical weapons? No, hold on a second. The regime has the only capability of delivering such missiles, and Syria has one of the largest depots of chemical weapons in the world. You may ask why the U.S. should intervene. The U.S. should not let Syria become a failed state like Afghanistan and Somalia. And we all know, in order for world peace, we need a stable Middle East, and Assad needs to be stopped. Just like 5 seconds, since the threat of the strike on Damascus have happened, Damascus is calm. You know why? Because all the Assad's militias and Goonies, they're running away, they're ducking and hiding. They're going into universities and schools and refugees and refugee camps, and they're hiding there. They're hiding in their attacks in civilian areas. So just the threat of the strike have helped save a lot of people's life. If you guys take out 10 jet fighters, that will save a lot of children. Thank you.
Okay, I think that there is another alternative. If we really care for the children and the women and the people, why don't we use all this money and all this energy to take care of the refugees?
My name is Jamil. I graduated from the UW here, work at the bookstore. Just a local guy, live down the street. I'm kind of concerned that your sources are the same as mine, YouTube. However, I have a great channel I want to give you. Good one for you to check out. So here's my concern. I'm an American history major from UW, and I'm actually learning a lot about American history a lot more out of school than when I was in school, actually, thanks to YouTube. Now, one of the things that I've been learning through this YouTube thing here is the involvement of these banks. Now, to kind of address the earlier question there about what's the U.S. foreign policy, and I really do think it actually is connected to Syria and what we're talking about tonight. What exactly is the involvement, I mean, coming from somebody who stays a lot of time on the Hill there, of these international banks, and how does that really play out in a foreign policy here in the Middle East, and are we really a proxy for something that we don't really know about, like you said earlier, to kind of diagnose the situation there? Thank you so much.
Just a comment. There are 100 and...
You got to talk right. You got to talk right into the microphone.
Okay, I'll try. There are 189 countries that signed a prohibition of development, producing, stockpiling, and the use of chemical weapons and their destruction. We, and I agree with you about going to the United Nations, should lobby them to get up and do something about the chemical weapons strikes. We, the United States, can no longer be the policeman of the world.
Well, Congressman McDermott, thank you for representing us. I live in your district. My name is Nelson Chen, and I just want to voice my opposition to this war with Syria. The reason for this is even though the use of chemical weapons on the civilians are horrible by the Assad regime, the rebels aren't as saints as they're made out to be by the media. If they had chemical weapons themselves and they had the capability to use them, they will use them in a heartbeat. And this war has morphed into a proxy war between Al-Qaeda, which is the rebels, and Hezbollah, which is the Assad regime. And so getting us involved is going to make things way more complicated than what it's already been, and it's going to be 60 days is not going to be enough time, and it's going to be an open-ended war. And the way things are going with the administration, it seems like we're watching the movie Groundhog Day. I mean, the Obama administration has become like the Bush administration preceding it. I mean, President Obama is seemingly acting more like George Bush, John Kerry like Dick Cheney, Chuck Hagel is Donald Rumsfeld, and so on. So I just really don't want to see us get involved in this conflict.
Thank you. Up there.
Okay, I didn't know if you were going to respond. As somebody who spent their early 20s looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, I'm extremely cautious about the possibility of us getting involved in another war. You might want to hold your applause. The issue, though, is that we're not debating whether or not chemical weapons actually exist. They do exist. And if we look at Iraq and we wonder why we didn't need to go into Iraq in 2003, it's because Iraq no longer had its chemical weapons infrastructure. The reason it didn't have that infrastructure is because in the mid-90s, Bill Clinton used airstrikes to take out the Iraqi chemical weapons infrastructure. Could you explain why this would be different than the usage of airstrikes in the mid-90s by Clinton to take out the chemical weapons in Iraq?
All right, so I'm going to honestly dispute the analogy. I recall a time when Bill Clinton authorized us to go into Somalia and to take out a warlord, and the operation failed. And it killed a lot of, George Bush, and it killed a lot of people. And that sucked, and we became isolationist, and we became very scared of going into another country, and we became very scared of trying to affect change. And the crisis after that was Rwanda. And I think actually Rwanda is a much closer analogy to what we're facing now. We're facing a regime that wants to kill its own people, that has been very, very successful at killing its own people, and our choices are not so much diplomacy or action or nothing. Our choices are really action or nothing. Assad has no reason to negotiate. He's winning. We've shown that we're not going to do anything. We've shown that we're not willing to use military force. When we have tried to use international sanction, international condemnation, it has failed. We've seen it fail in Iran. We've seen it fail in North Korea. Diplomacy is a great idea, but it just doesn't work in a modern world where you have Syria supported by Russian regimes. You know, the choices are essentially we can go to the UN and we can ask them for authorization, and they may give it or they may not, but either way, Russia's not going to yield, and we are not going to get Security Council authorization. So we can choose that as a reason to stand back and say, well, now we can't go in. you know what, people are going to get slaughtered and that's okay because we don't have UN authorization. Or we can say, you know what, we've learned from history. We learned that when a citizen population is getting slaughtered and we don't go in, we regret it years later, that it's often not a huge sacrifice. In Rwanda, we didn't need that much to shut down a lot of the killing. We can choose not to go in, but we do have to bear the moral consequences of allowing women and children to die because we don't want to.
Good evening, Congressman McDermott. As one who adamantly opposed the debacle in the desert of Iraq, I strongly support President Obama's decision. And this most closely resembles, although hardly a carbon copy clone, not Somalia, but more Kosovo and the recent action in Libya. Because we joined an international community and used our air power by stopping the genocidal slaughter of Milosevic and by stopping the slaughter of his own people, Gaddafi, we saved not only dozens, not hundreds, not thousands, but literally tens of thousands of lives of innocent men, women, and children. And I thought you supported our action in both those cases. The number of fatalities suffered by Americans, 0. The number of ground troops entered, 0. Now, I believe President Obama when he says he's not going to enter a single ground troop, and the likely, although no one has a crystal ball, we will also likely suffer no fatalities. Now, I don't expect in those two cases that Assad will be gone quickly, and I don't expect the civil war to stop. But I think it's reasonable to assume that Assad will be less likely to unleash chemical weapons on innocent men, women, and children, not more likely if we take this action. So we won't have to see those flickering images of men, women, and children gasping for breath and writhing in agony in a most horrific death. And even though we disagree on this one, I just want to say the same in 1989 as now. I cannot be prouder to have you as my congressman. Thank you.
You are absolutely correct in saying that the first step should be to go to the United Nations General Assembly. We have to get the opinion of the world with us and a free and open debate, and we have to do that in order to give prestige to the United Nations. Now, people here are hearing the word airstrike. It's more than an airstrike, it's an air war. The administration spokesmen on television have said that they intend to destroy the air command and control, the air defenses, the planes on the ground, the airfields, the arsenals, the depots, and then they're going to find out that in World War I, poison gas was delivered by artillery canisters, and so they're going to have to go after the artillery and tanks as well. It is really a war on the Syrian government. And I think the casualties will be grossly disproportionate to those who have already been lost. Now, in the long term, I would take another analogy. We got involved in 1952 in Iran when Mossadegh was trying to manipulate to power, and he was trying to create a dictatorship, and we helped him overthrow and put in the Shah. Well, and people welcomed it. But in a few years, the Shah became a ruthless dictator, and the next generation hated us for it, and Khomeini drew on that to create in Iran the dictatorship we now have. Think not 5 to 10 days, but 5 to 10 years, and the things that can happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I also just want to thank you for being here tonight. Thank everybody. I think everybody in the audience is being, largely very civil to a lot of different opinions. So thanks to the audience as well. I also just want to speak out in favor of whether or not it's airstrikes or something else taking action. I do not think it's appropriate or the right decision for America to stand by while 5,000 people die every month, while we create endlessly more refugee crises. I do also agree with the people who have spoken about the analogies to Kosovo, and knowing that those limited strikes helped force Milosevic to the negotiating table and helped also led to prosecutions at the criminal court. So 2 questions for you really quickly is, you seem to be leaning towards the Iraq analogy, so I'm wondering why you have maybe ruled out, or maybe you haven't, the Kosovo analogy. And then also, knowing that, I also agree that we should seek international cooperation on whatever we do, how can the Congress, in whatever they authorize, give the President the strongest possible position to go to the UN with?
Yes.
Representative McDermott, I'm here because you already know, and you need it emphasized to you, that of the 0.7 million you represent, I am far from the only one to figure that the only goal rationally pursued by, let us not mince words, making war on Syria is showing that we are a capable aggressor state. Please respond.
Congressman, as my congressman, I would ask that you do more than just lean against military intervention into Syria. I would ask that you use Congress's power of the purse to open up that black ops budget, find out what kind of money we've been sending into by way of our CIA, by way of Saudi Arabia, and all our others, to orchestrate this problem, and for at whose say. I have a hunch, like some of the previous speakers, it's about money, people with big money. It's about us, again, being a useful idiot for every scoundrel in the world.
Hi, Jim. My name's David Ludden. I'm grateful that you're my representative. And what I want to say with respect to my Syrian brothers and sisters back here, I'm a compassionate individual, passionately so, and I feel for their people. What I don't think is, while we're taking away food stamps from poor children, while we're enriching the richest 1% of this country, which is ultimately the goal of the military-industrial complex that you mentioned, I don't think these things allow us to go in there, first of all. Second of all, I remember a guy a couple of thousand years ago that said, "Let he who be without sin throw the first stone." So let's make sure that we're clean before we go cleaning up somebody else. I think we can do a hell of a lot more for Syrian people who have escaped Syria than we can for those in Syria. And I think we can do it without endangering the United States interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, in the balcony.
Okay. My name is David Trujillo. I am a constituent of yours here in Seattle. I don't know how I would describe myself politically, but I kind of a radical in many ways. But I definitely support the president in a lot of ways. I was in Florida for my college, and I supported him, as a fellow in 2012 very strongly. And it was the most crucial part of Florida, so I think I definitely have an impact on re-electing him. Nevertheless, I'm completely opposed to his plan to bomb Syria, and let me explain to you why. I'm a political science major, and I've been studying political science for a while and looking at what really determines the outcomes in the political process as far as what actually happens in the political system. And one thing I've discovered is that very rarely the official sort of discourse about what is happening and what our reasons are for doing things are the actual reasons we're doing the things. For us to talk about chemical weapons, to me, is completely absurd because we used napalm in Iraq. My friend from Syria here spoke about napalm and white phosphorus. We used napalm in Iraq, and we watched as the Israelis used white phosphorus on the Gazans in 2009. So for us to talk about chemical weapons, it's just nonsense. Excuse me, but it's bullshit. And it's not the reason why we would think to be going in. There is no strong human rights lobby within the US government, especially in the area of foreign policy. If we look at other areas of policy, like domestic policy, we can see that it's the same thing. Like, human rights groups don't have a lot of influence. They definitely don't. It's always other reasons why we do things. The food stamp program, for example, which I totally support, does not survive because of human rights pressure from groups which do lobby on it. It survives because of pressure from Walmart, from food distributors, from other groups that have a lot more money, much more organized. They're the reason it survives, because they get a lot of money from this. So, like, I don't believe in any way that this is about chemical weapons. I don't think so at all. I think it's about geopolitics, for one, because we've hated Syria for a long time, and we want to get them out of the picture because they're allied with Iran. They supported insurgents in Iraq. They have been an enemy of Turkey and a pain in Turkey's butt for a long time. They have supported Israel's people who are against Israel, like Hezbollah. And so I completely don't like. I hate the Assad regime, and I hate the Syrian regime, and I completely want the Syrian revolution to succeed. However, if we went in there,
I think you've extended your 3 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll cut it short as soon as I can. So, I mean, if we went in there, I'm very bad at, I barely give speeches, excuse me. If we went into Syria, I think the consequences could be disastrous. The Saudis and the Israelis are in favor of our strikes because they would benefit from a new regime. The Russians are against it. The Chinese are against it. The Turks are probably going to be for it. So what this could do would be to draw in all these different actors into a very volatile situation that could explode, and who knows what consequences there could be. And as someone who is invested in our...
Thank you. Okay. I want to move on to the next one.
Last sentence.
Thank you. I hear you. I hear your point, but I don't want you to keep going on because we got people down here waiting. Thank you.
Representative McDermott, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things I learned when I was a kid is that things are not always as they appear, and you can't always trust what you hear. And I thought the last gentleman really explained thoroughly the different forces at work which mold our foreign policy. He's right. It's not about helping anybody. I wish I could say it was, but as far as I know, our entire foreign policy history has not demonstrated that. And let me be even more frank. We're all sitting or standing on stolen ground here. At one point, this belonged to the Native Americans. But I think there's hope. Not the kind of hope that Obama talked about. I don't know what kind of hope that was. A different kind of hope. Because all of these people here, all of us here tonight, demonstrate that we do not accept this kind of a geopolitical order. We have a dream for a better world. Now, some people might think that's naive. I don't think so. You know, as a child, another thing I learned was the story of the boy who cried wolf. And in that story, when people are telling you something to make you afraid over and over again, eventually it loses its power. And you realize, hopefully, that there really isn't anything to be afraid of. So I think we should all take a deep breath right now and try to go back to that place we were in before 9/11, before this dark cloud of fear settled over this country. I think we can go there if we want to.
I appreciate your saying that, and I'm going to...
Hi, Representative McDermott. My name is Alex Martin. Earlier you asked us a question, how do we solve the Syrian problem? I do not want to see the Assad regime remain in power. However, I'm here to tell you that military strikes are not a solution to the Syrian problem. First of all, the idea of a limited strike. Such a strike is not sufficient to contain chemical weapons on the ground. For the US to attempt to influence the Syrian situation through military force would require a full-scale invasion. And if we do, I think that is dangerous for Syria, that is dangerous for the US, that is dangerous for the region. That is not good for the Syrian people. While there are secular fighting forces on the ground within the Free Syrian Army, by and large, they have not been militarily effective. There are not fighting forces that the US can effectively aid which will solve the problem in Syria. Additionally, this represents a dangerous ramping up between Russian and American tensions. The positioning of the US and Russian fleets in the Mediterranean recently is frankly frightening. I want to encourage you to stay strong in your decision to vote no on the war in Syria.
Hello. Hi, my name is Anastasia. And I just have to say that this whole Syria war is just a complete trap. The whole thing is a complete trap. Because just like other folks have been saying, this is going to spark a thermonuclear world war. Right? And before we start going around and bombing the hell out of everybody else, you know, we should really look at what our own president has been doing. We've been killing people all around the world with drones. We've gone into illegal wars already. Right? And so instead of, you know, sitting here arguing about something like this, we should be thinking about where's our nation going to be going? One, we need to get industry and manufacturing back into the United States, right? We need to start massive reindustrialization. And two, Obama needs to be impeached. Will you impeach Obama?
Hello, I have a short statement I'd like to read. Much discussion over whether we should intervene in Syria is based around this polarization of militarized loyalists of Assad versus violent rebels with links to al-Qaeda. I want to make sure that everyone is aware that there is much more to the rebellion than this. There's a huge network of nonviolent resistance groups in Syria actively working for peace and self-determination. The Syria Nonviolence Movement made an interactive map that can be viewed online, outlining labor unions, art coalitions, youth and student groups, town councils, public education campaigns, etc., that are working to end the killing and allow the Syrian people to reform the government as best serves them. Aside from that, Obama's push for punitive military strikes disturbs me. Military strikes too often result in the death and displacement of civilians, as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. Furthermore, if the goal is to punish or oust Assad, this likely won't in itself resolve the Syrian people's struggle for true democracy. Remember Egypt, where Mubarak was replaced with Morsi, and we know how that turned out. Simply ousting Mubarak without altering his regime's institutions did not result in true democracy, and I fear the same thing could happen in Syria. I don't feel the US has tried enough diplomatic solutions to the crisis. My proposal, as an alternative to military strikes, is to provide aid to the Syrian refugees, pressure Russia to allow the Syrian people to determine their own future, and push for Assad to be tried by the International Criminal Court. Thank you.
She'll make a good member of Congress. She wrote her speech down to keep it short. Go ahead.
My name is Phil Welt. I live locally, and I'd also like to say that I'm very proud to have you as my representative and have been for many years. I like to think that I am an ethical person and feel for the suffering of others. Also, as a father of a young child, I shudder whenever I see pictures of children needlessly killed without any reason. On the other hand, I am a believer in foreign politics, in something called realpolitik. I think there are a lot of bad actors in the world, and I think that the U.S., to get where it wants and what it wants in the world, what I want in the world long term, has to think in its interests. Precisely for that reason, I am very against this strike in Syria, as I was against the involvement in Iraq and as I was against the involvement in Afghanistan. I formed that opinion, but then I read an article by a man you may know named Ryan Crocker, and people who are interested can find this on the web at Yale Global Syria. And Ryan Crocker is a retired ambassador to count them six, of the countries on that map: Pakistan, Lebanon, Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, and most recently he came out of retirement to be ambassador to Afghanistan. And what Ryan Crocker does in this short article is he does compare the situation to Bosnia, and he compares it to other situations. He further points out that this conflict between the Assad government and the people who are there has been going on since the 80s. This is precisely the conflict that caused 140 Marines to lose their lives in a bombing in 1982 or 83. And I commend to people that article, and I believe that the people closest to the situation have the best insight about what to be done. And when a man of that tenure and with that experience as an ambassador says, this is crazy to do, I pay a lot of attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take one in the balcony.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate a lot of the comments from people, but I think the discussion around whether we should strike Syria it's not an honest discussion if it's kept just around Syria. I think you're very aware, given all of your experience, that there are many geostrategists who have laid out plans for toppling various regimes. We've seen it carried out under Bush and Obama. I mean, you know about people like Bernard Lewis and the Sam Huntingtons. And their ultimate agenda is to encircle Russia and China and pit the United States and Europe against those two nations who, frankly, there's no reason why we should be enemies with these countries. Now, it's important to think about that because I think what's not really being discussed, one lady brought it up, is the danger of nuclear war. And I want to make two references. One, to Robert Kennedy's 13 Days, because in that book, he actually lays out how a nuclear war would happen. And what he says is that it's not as if somebody's going to wake up one day and decide we're going to have nuclear war. He says it's going to happen because of a miscalculation or a misjudgment. Now, I'll also want to reference the statements by the Russian military leadership, the former General Makarov from about a year ago, but also the former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev. I believe it was in St. Petersburg in May of 2012, where he laid out the warning that these local or regional conflicts could actually escalate into larger strategic conflicts that could result in nuclear warfare. And I think that's the thing that's not being discussed, and I think you have a responsibility as a leader, not just for people in Seattle, but for the nation and the world, to make this discussion the forefront of what's happening in the Congress. And when you go back to DC tomorrow, instead of actually talking about whether we're going to strike Syria or not, you need to talk about impeaching Obama because he's already a war criminal. And he doesn't really care. He doesn't care if the Congress gives him authority. He's already done it before in Libya, and I'm sure he'll do it again.
Congressman, friends, let's make a couple assumptions for a moment here. I don't believe any of these things, but let's assume that they're true for the moment. One, that our hands are entirely clean, that our motives are totally pure, that this has nothing to do with Iran. Let's assume that we can have a military strike that will only kill guilty people. Let's assume that this would all work, that Assad would be removed, that everything would be sunshine. Well, that's the thing. We can't make that assumption because violence is a terrible teacher. If you want to get a message across to the whole wide world about chemical weapons, violence is a terrible teacher. History shows us that the only way that these cycles of violence are broken is with compassion. Somebody mentioned Rwanda. The reason we haven't seen Rwanda in the news since is because they became aware of that and they put forward a real effort at reconciliation. So there really aren't any good options today. There really aren't. And the bottom line is that if the American government, through its continual use of violence, has kind of poisoned the well in the Middle East, there's not a whole lot that the American government can do. But there's a lot that Americans can do. I think the government's job is to stand back and let people work for peace.
I'm going to take two more questions, and then I've got to go. So I'm sorry for those of you who've stood in line, but I can't wait till ever. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to say that you should definitely vote against this. The United States government has no moral authority to tell anybody to do anything. As Martin Luther King said in 1967 in his Riverside speech, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world is the United States government. This government is going around the world to dominate the world for the economic interests of its large corporations. That's what the foreign policy of the United States government is. I would invite you, and I would invite everybody here, to become an opponent of the U.S. empire. Not to say, what should the empire do? Should it do diplomacy? Should it do war? Should it do this? Should it do that? We should be opposed to this empire and try to get rid of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make mine very fast for the lady behind me. A, we have not been elected as the policeman of the world. B, we have no moral duty to protect anybody but our own country. If we do have a moral duty, then we should be protecting North Korea. And lastly, for the person who said violence is always bad, I do not think Gandhi would have survived against Adolf Hitler and the SS.
I just want to say that I think it's so important that people came out tonight, and we must not waste the humanitarian thoughts that we do have for the people in the world on thinking that Obama is going to listen to people. Okay, October 6th is the anniversary of when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan after 9/11, a totally innocent country. I'm so glad people brought up the fact that the U.S. has used chemical weapons from napalm to Agent Orange to white phosphorus. There's no reason anybody here should think the U.S. is going in for any humanitarian reason. It's for global imperialist power plays to maintain their dominance around the world. So we need to unite.
One last question.
My name is Mark Drummond. I'm with the Freedom Socialist Party. And Congressman, since you're a physician, I'd want to tell you about a new affliction affecting Americans. It's called the Iran-Afghanistan syndrome. The American people do not want another war of choice. Our government has shown time and time again that it cannot act responsibly with the war machine it has at its disposal. We have to look at how this all started. It was an extension of the Arab Spring. To disrupt it, we funded Islamic militants to start an armed conflict. We've already done enough. We don't need to do any more. Now President Obama wants to contain the civil war in Syria and the Arab Spring in order to guarantee a favorable outcome to U.S. imperialism, using this gas attack as an excuse. It's not humanitarianism. It's a cold, calculated, devious manipulation that will lead to greater suffering for the Syrian people and the defeat of the revolution they are trying and dying to make. The Freedom Socialist Party condemns the U.S. intervention in Syria, regardless of the guise in which it's delivered. The U.S. war machine and its humanitarian ruling class supporters at home and abroad share no common interest with the Syrian people. Freedom for Syrians will be won by the Syrian people themselves, just as working people of the United States must fight for and win our own freedom from our own corporate masters. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry that I have got to go.
McDermott held a town hall meeting in Seattle to talk about the crisis in Syria. 1,000 people packed a church last night to hear what he had to say and give their thoughts as well. McDermott said he doesn't support President Obama's suggestion for an airstrike, and that if the U.S. attacked Syria, it could be the beginning of another war.
You may remember Iraq, we were going to be in and out in 60 days.
The majority of people there said they're opposed to an airstrike, but a few did say they support it and something needs to be done. Now, tomorrow night, President Obama will speak to
Channel 4 News. Liz, thank you. This morning, Washington Congressman Jim McDermott is heading back to D.C. to vote on Syria, just hours after meeting with concerned citizens here on the issue.
For us to talk about chemical weapons, to me, is completely absurd.
It's wasting time. Every second counts in Syria.
During last night's packed meeting at the University Temple United Methodist Church in Seattle, some spoke in support of a strike, others against it. It seems clear which way the congressman is leaning.
This issue is framed as we will either do an airstrike or nothing. People say, well, we can't do nothing. Well, isn't there anything else besides an airstrike? Yes, it's called diplomacy.
A new CNN poll released overnight shows 59% of people do not want Congress to pass a resolution authorizing a military strike. As our state's delegation gets more.
It is a different type of Sunday service. At this Seattle church, the pews packed for a sermon by a U.S. congressman.
He thought that he, as the president, could make the decision and would move forward. We don't.
Representative Jim McDermott was on the pulpit for what he called a listening session, something to cut through the noise of past weeks.
Should take military action for that. There should absolutely be no American boots on the ground.
The ears that were here heard strong statements.
It's a threat of
like the one from a man named Muhammad.
If you guys take out 10 jet fighters, that will save a lot of children.
He still has loved ones in Syria.
There's a lot of family, yeah, immediate family, yeah.
Muhammad didn't want his last name used because he fears for his family's safety, but wore his opinion on his back.
It says strike to end the war. Totally for any strike that will put Assad in his place.
The response is...
McDermott says he is still not convinced. Told the crowd he's leaning against, siding with his fellow Democratic president.
I'm elected to be a representative by the people of the 7th District. I wasn't elected to support whatever the president wants to do.
He also said at this listening session, this debate...
What exactly is the vision?
...will be loud for days to come. Chris Daniels, King 5 News.